Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and today we're going to be talking about the new project from Alterity called Afterlife. So just so you all understand my point of reference with this, let me describe how I handle artists who are more of a Bandcamp independent stripe that wind up on my schedule. Most of it would seem pretty self-explanatory, unless they absolutely blow me away with a great project or I have literally nothing else to talk about on my schedule, like in early January. I typically put these artists more on the trailing edge. And for the most part, folks have been just fine with this. The acts are just starting out or they're very underground after all, and sometimes bringing down my full critical scrutiny can be a lot to handle. And while there's often a consideration on my part when it comes to traffic, there's also the acknowledgement that a lot of these acts, they're just starting out. They don't exactly give me a ton to say that'd be all that unique or distinctive. Now, of course, there are some exceptions where I do have a fair bit more to say. I'm sure some of you who are familiar with my Eric Taxon reviews, you know this by now, but Alterity is a bit of a different case. A duo of producers who also happen to contribute to my Patreon. Thanks guys, but it's a no guarantee of a positive review or not winding up on the trailing edge for the record. Now they patiently voted this up the schedule, and I'll freely admit that after checking out their debut EP, I was pretty sure this was going to wind up on the trailing edge too. Not that it was bad by any stretch, but more that I was just generally a little bit underwhelmed by their sound and approach, of which I am very familiar, and I've got some pretty strong taste in what I like in this collection of subgenres. But alright, fine. What is there to even really say about their follow-up right here with Afterlife? Well, I will tell you. This was more interesting than I was expecting. Not precisely better, mind you, and I have plenty of strong opinions around where they could possibly take their sound, but there was enough here that I thought I could make this a full review and a point of where to guide the project possibly going forward. Call this more of a teachable moment for lack of better words, but many of the issues I have encountered with Afterlife I've heard on a lot of indie projects in this lane before, and I figured might as well use this as more of an object lesson, albeit less of a full recommendation. Although I do want to say that for the record, this is pretty promising and actually winds up on the decent part of the spectrum after a number of re-listens. It actually is a pretty good album, if not really a great one. And you know, I've beaten around the bush long enough surrounding the genre of this project, mostly because it fits more under a distinctive aesthetic rather than a straightforward definition of the sound, specifically the brand of early to mid-80s synthpop that would eventually mutate into darkwave as the decade proceeded on, with a heavier focus on some chillier atmosphere, drums that will sound increasingly programmed, even if they aren't always, some murky synth tones, and some guitar leads that've got some sizzle and bite, but not a lot of distortion or feedback or even really a lot of presence within the mix. But the first thing you'll notice going through this album is that even that description doesn't quite feel adequate to describe it. There was a part of me that really wanted to flag this album as more on the goth rock spectrum, but in truth it doesn't really have the tightness or edge that characterized the post-punk and new wave that was defining this territory, and often feels a little bit too restrained to pick up how that genre mutated in the late 80s. But I'd also struggle to call it a modern sensibility either. Sure, there's what might sound like a trap progression on Welcome to the Dark Side, but it doesn't really last, it's only in the percussion, and as a whole, this record rarely approaches the orchestral bombast that characterize the morbid iconography that persists in the genre so much to this day. Yes, Marian kinda gets close to some of the vocal overdubs, but I put more of that onto the delivery from the guest star Maverick than anything else. And you know, if it sounds like I'm struggling here to contextualize the album, it's cause I am, but also because the album is better suited to capturing a very specific atmosphere and vibe than any larger consistency in production or genre, which results in some transitions across this album that feel like they should make more sense than they actually do. They work emotionally, but not quite logically. Part of this comes from the first third of this album playing itself very straight and very cold, almost reminiscent of what a Lacuna Coil wannabe would have sounded like without the metal in the early 2000s. But by the time we get the very melancholic synthesizers and bells and the reverb saturated, most love songs are an attempt at the commercial exploitation lately with the husky male vocals from DeLive. There is this distinctive mood shift from the more nakedly sexual first third. But then after an extended instrumental interlude, we get a series of cuts that have got a lot more momentum, with a lot of quicker, low-end grooves, more prominent guitar leads, somewhat more aggressive vocals coming out of Maverick. They feel like songs that Pat Benatar might have cut in the early 80s if she was willing to play to darker, more gothic tones and subject matter. And then, after yet another faster pulsating groove with black roses, red dresses, and a bad idea that demands you to dance, we get a reverb-touched piano ballad with the final guest star Ghostnote Lab, who is easily the most potent and convincing singer on the project with her throatier, more theatrical timbre. Hell, it sounds like something that Lady Gaga would have made for A Star Is Born, except better and more goth. And this leads to my biggest issue with this project that really demands a lot of focus. Consistency, especially in the production. I get that they're working with 4 distinctive singers, this production duo is, but the vocal production and the layering isn't even consistent between them, and it feels like less of differing viewpoints in the scene and more like their vocal recording setups were just not on the same level. And this really hurts Sandra Bullock in particular, one of the guest stars. She's nestled more deeply into the mix, her vocal track is certainly not as prominent as her peers, and while she does have the pipes and presence, the production inconsistency kind of winds up marginalizing her. At the very least, a thicker vocal arrangement could have helped. And sadly, this is also true about a lot of the electric guitar lines that she contributes as well. Yeah, I'm not personally crazy about the weedier tone and the overdubs that were necessary to flush out the low end. They really should have been done to give the guitar some meat and presence, but the focus on cleaner electronic grooves, the synthesizers, the drums, that means that guitar edge is really pushed aside. And considering how seedy and dirty parts of this album want to be, that's about the last thing you want to do, yet you're neutralizing part of that edge. And then there's the open question of sequencing, because the album doesn't really build a lot of momentum until its back half, which might be good for setting a mood initially, but you do need to have at least a melodic hook to entice the audience into this environment if you're not going to rely on filthier production or more provocative lyricism or any sense of rawness anywhere. And as it is, the album starts off pretty listless and moody and might kick into gear too late to grab listeners, or just come at the wrong time in terms of you set the mood but then you really crank it up. And I gotta be honest, I'm not sure the lyrics help here either. Again, this might be a factor of the genre and the style being really overexposed to me, but the poetry didn't really stand out as being all that distinctive or punchy, a little bit too heavily reliant on goth cliches and imagery and abstraction, with really only the vampiric, the looks that kill really standing out in terms of lyrical storytelling. I mean, it's not bad writing, but it doesn't really stand out much either. But at the end of the day, look, I'll give this project points for creating a pretty effective sense of atmosphere that I do like. And I do think the component elements are here to make a pretty damn solid retro-leaning darkwave project. Just a little bit more care in the execution, this could have been great. Keep the vocal mixing and mastering consistent between the guests, punch up the guitars, maybe take a second or third draft of the lyrics for something that's a little bit more beyond cliche, maybe find some slightly more appropriate vocal melody lines. The juxtaposition between progressions that originated in very different eras of goth music or even outside of goth did get distracting for me, and then sequence the project to hold consistent momentum, then you could have something special. But as it is, I'm giving this a 6 out of 10 and a recommendation, but a qualified one, because if you're familiar with this sort of darkwave sound, you will have heard this done a lot better elsewhere. Gotta be honest there. But at the same time, I see a lot of potential, so if you're curious, Alterity, they will be a man to watch, so yeah, check these guys out. Pretty worth it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I gotta admit, I'm a little bit surprised I'm even making this review, but I wound up with enough to say, and hey, you want to buy or stream the record, links down there below, and I got the poll up there for those few of you who actually checked this out. I'm curious where you guys fall on it. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process or help support the channel, link to my Patreon is right over there. 3 times a week, you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. All you independent artists who actually want to get on my schedule, there's your opportunity. Hey, see what happened here. Beyond that, if you want to see what's on my schedule, it's on my Instagram, link down there below. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.